Hi, I'm Shannon Wedel, and this is a Calder inspired wire sculptures. The project that I do, I complete with my sixth graders. I teach kindergarten through sixth grade. Um, you could gear this down to fifth grade. I personally wouldn't go any lower than that. And I really think that you could do quite a bit with it in middle school and high school level. The work that my students do is pretty basic. But if you had older students, a little bit more experience with what they're doing, I think they could really take off and do some pretty cool things with the project. Um, the work that my students do is based off of early projects that uh, Alexander Calder created very early on in his career. I got the idea for it from the book Sandy Circus, that's done by Tanya Lee Stone and was illustrated by Boris Kulikoff. That's where I heard about Alexander Calder's circus performers. And then I did some research after that once I had read the book. Back in 1926, Alexander Calder moved to Paris. He Wherever he went, he had wire with him and pliers, and he would make these really cool sculptures of people's faces, of friends, and so forth as he was going around. And he started making these little wire sculptures of circus performers. Over time, he kind of built it up and made more and more pieces to this moving, functional circus. Wire was certainly a prominent material that he used, but he used all different kinds of things, scraps of wood, fabric, just all kinds of materials that he had around him, anything that he kind of get his hands on. At that time, he was traveling back and forth between Paris and New York, and he was taking these circus pieces with him in his suitcases. And he actually was performing his circus in his little apartment and would charge a small admission fee. And that was how he helped pay his rent. And over a period of time, he kind of gained a following, people coming and seeing this performance that he was doing. And his notoriety kind of went from there. The book is mainly about that time and some of the pieces that he created and little details about it and so forth. And it's an interesting story. I do go through the book with my students. I've never had any students complain about it being a little kid book, anything like that. It's a pretty interesting story, and they're into it. I did find a recording of it on YouTube that you can play if you don't want to read through the book itself. It's pretty easy to locate. One thing that I found when I was doing some research on it, later on in Alexander Calder's career, the Whitney Museum in New York was wanting to do a retrospective of his work. And as they were researching and putting pieces together of what they were going to include in the retrospective, they kept hearing stories about his circus. And so when they talked to him personally about it, they asked him if he had any photographs or anything like that of the documentation of what the circus had looked like back in the early or late 1920s. And he actually still had all the pieces. He still had them in the original suitcases that he had traveled with. And I it was my understanding that no one really realized any of the pieces were still around. And so the Whitney Museum asked him to perform it again so that they could uh, make a recording of it, video him going through the performance, and he agreed to it. You can find the entire thing on YouTube. It's quite a long thing. I think it's somewhere around 2.5 hours long. But I have found there are also some shorter clips that are available. With my students being elementary students, I've been careful about what I've shown them. There are some of the performers, some of the pieces of his uh, circus that are not kid friendly. Um, there's some nudes in some of it and some of the pieces that he created. Um, so some of the longer, I should say, longer recordings include some of those pieces. There is a shorter piece. Let's see, I've got it here. Here we go. There's a shorter piece that's included on YouTube, that's about right at 5 minutes, um, that doesn't have any of those pieces in it. And it's short enough that the kids are really interested in it and they enjoy seeing it. wanted to show you that because it really does give you an idea of what the full thing looked like. Um, do this bit. I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about materials and so forth that I use with my students. This year, with all the COVID stuff, I've had to change how I've done it a little bit because of the tools with it. What I have done the last several years is the students have had um, I've had pipe cleaners and straw beads, twisties wires, number of different materials that they have been able to use, along with a couple of different sizes of armature wire. This is the size, I believe it's 14 gauge, that I have given the students to use as kind of the base for their project normally. And I usually give them about, I kind of measure it out with my arms, or arms width. Um, and then here, when I give this to the students, I make sure that I curve the ends. Because a lot of times, especially when they're in close proximity with each other, this is usually a much larger piece. But they're sitting there fiddling with this side, this end of it, and moving and bending this, and the other end is just moving all over the place. And so it's really easy to accidentally whack somebody with this. So I always make sure that when I give it to them, the ends are curved, and I tell them they have to keep them that way for a safety thing, so they're not poking somebody in the eye with them, and they have to be careful with it. And I show them a lot of times they want to end, or should I say, they want to start with the end and work here and try to manipulate things. But actually, especially if they're making a human figure, it's a lot of times easier to start with the center and work with bending the head and the arms and so forth with the body and working that way. And then this more symmetrical when they're working with their figure. With this wire, it is thick enough that you're not going to be able to cut this with scissors, or at least you're going to bust your scissors if you do. So what I have done in the past is given each group a pack of some basic tools. These are really cheap ones. This is not anything that has broken the bank. These are ones I got at Walmart. They're like $1.50 each. Each one of my tool sets has had a regular pair of pliers, a set of needle nose pliers, and then a set of wire cutters. And these, as small as they are, work really well for this thin wire. Works well for the twisties wires as well. Um, this is the reason why I've not been able to use this kind of wire this year, because I don't have enough of the tools for each one of my kids to have their own. And with COVID and having to have everything cleaned and disinfected, I can't let my students share the tools. If you had a classroom where you have like jewelry supplies, that kind of thing, and you have enough of these supplies that the kids don't have to share, it wouldn't be an issue. But for me, I didn't have the budget to run out and buy a whole bunch of these. So I had to tweak it a little bit, and I'll get to the tweaking a little bit later. What I have done when I have used this 14 gauge wire with my students, armature wire, and a big coil of this is about, I think it's about 25 bucks. But you can get a lot of projects out of this. So yeah, there is some investment with the wire. It's not a super cheap project, but really the investment goes a long way. The other thing that I've gotten is this much heavier duty wire. This particular one, I ordered this from Saks, and for whatever reason, they don't have the gauge on it. They call it 1/8 inch. Um, the 14 gauge wire is 1/16 inch, I believe is what they call it. So this is twice as thick. This is about $40, but a little goes a very long way. This particular wire I am the one who uses it. If I had older students that had a little bit more experience with it, I might trust them a little bit more. But with sixth graders, I handle this. And some of my students don't even need it. The only time that this is used um, is to make stands and armatures to kind of help them in the support part of it. Um, and it is a much thicker wire, much heavier duty, and these little bitty wire cutters won't cut it. I have a pair that's the good pair that I spent money on, and I use mine to cut this. And again, I bend the ends of it so nobody loses an eye using them. But this I cut, and the kids can manipulate it, but I definitely watch them and help them do it. Um, and you can make different frames for things so that uh, their projects will stand up a little bit more easily. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. Um, this particular project was done with that. This is that thicker wire to use as a stand. That. And then some of it is also used for the hoop. And then this figure of the acrobat is done with the thinner wire, the 14 gauge. And then there's twisties wire that's used for the hair and for part of the body. And this part here is actually some scrap fabric. I have had fabric available for my students. They actually have a harder time dealing with the fabric than they do the wire. It might be something that would work a little bit better for older students. A lot of times they just have a hard time manipulating it and knowing what to do with it. So a lot of my students wind up kind of abandoning the fabric. They don't really use it that much. It's much more of a wire intensive project. Like I said, this is one example. This one is another one with a little lion tamer and a line going through a hoop. Again, this is using the thicker wire. A lot of the projects that have used the heavier duty wire have turned out larger. They're not always this large. I have had a few that have wound up being even bigger than this. A lot of time acrobats, when they're wanting to do multiple figures, they get kind of big. But a lot of them are smaller than this. Here is another piece. This is done with the wire itself, straw beads that are hooked onto the wire, and then some pom poms that have been bent onto it to make a clown that's juggling. Now, one of the things that's been a little bit of a challenge for my sixth graders, because this is the very first time they've used wire as a sculpture medium, so it's very much a new concept for them, is getting pieces to move. I don't require it because it is such a new thing, but that's the part of the Calder video that they're fascinated by, that it's not just these still circus figures, that he's actually able to make it a moving circus. Those are the parts that the kids are just amazed that he can create that to do. So that's kind of an extra thing. If it's kind of an extra bonus if they can get their piece to move. And some of the kids can engineer it, some of them not so much. Like I said, it's not a requirement, but they definitely get bonus points if they can do that. If you had older students, middle school, high school kids, it would be something that they could probably engineer a little bit more easily. In all the years that I've been doing this project, and it's been probably 6 or 7 years, um, I have had very, very few, maybe 4 students that I've had to take materials from as far as safety wise. And I spend a lot of time talking about the safety, that they have to be careful with the tools, they have to be careful with the wire itself. They're not going to poke somebody in the eye because they're not making very smart decisions. And we have a little talk about that to begin with. But even my little harder to handle students are fascinated by the materials. They love the fact that they're getting to use wire. It's not something they've ever done before. And so I really don't have discipline issues doing this project, very, very rarely, because they get so involved in it, they get so excited about doing something with it, that there's a lot of motivation to do what they're supposed to be doing instead of goofing off. So like I said, in all the years I've been doing this with as many classes as I've done this with, because I go around to 5 buildings. So I have about 120, 130 sixth graders each year. Um, I think it's only been maybe 4 kids that I've had to take materials from. It just hasn't happened very often. They really get into it. They really enjoy it. It is a challenge for them because they haven't done the wire before. They're not used to the engineering of it. They're having to do some problem solving with it. Sometimes the kids want to kind of give up or they just get frustrated. I tell them, this is uncharted territory. You've never done this before. It's just like the very first time you tried to write your name when you were little. It probably didn't go very well. You had to practice writing your name every day in kindergarten. You're going to have to practice using these materials. And if they are trying, but they're messing up with materials, as long as they're not wasting it, as long as they're not just doing dumb things with it, I will give them more wire if they need it. And if they've used all the wire that they have and they're wanting to build more details and add more stuff to it, I give them more wire with it. This year, because of the limitations that I have with not being able to give them the tools, I can't give them the heavier duty wire. So it's basically this year become mostly a pipe cleaner project. I could have gone ahead and given them the twisties wire, but the kids tend to like the pipe cleaners better anyway. It's such a thin, easy to manipulate wire that it's a little bit more forgiving, and they like all the different color options and so forth with it. So I've been leaning very heavily on the pipe cleaners and the straw beads this year. And we've come out with some pretty good projects. They're not exactly the same as what they usually are, but it still gives them a pretty good chance to manipulate and do a lot of things. And the thing that's really nice about pipe cleaners is there's a million different colors of them. I ordered a whole bunch of packs. They have some packs that are all skin colors, so they can take their pick if they're doing, acrobats or whatever, people with their performances. There are hot colors. There are just the plain assorted colors. It has surprised me. The colors that have been in demand the most, the ones that I have run out of the quickest. Black, I figured would probably be a color that'd be pretty popular, but orange and white have been colors that the kids have used a lot of, and they're always asking for more of them and having to open up more packs for those specific colors. So next year, hopefully, we'll be able to go back to using the regular wire, but if not, I'll probably order um, more packs that are just those specific colors that are kind of the in-demand colors for them. I did want to show you some of the student projects that they have created. Let me get myself out of the way a little bit here. Let's see. It's going to let me go through. Okay, this is one that has been created this year, so it's just pipe cleaners, a couple of different pictures. What I have the students do once we go through the book and the video and so forth, I have them start out with a sketch, at least one. And we talk about how the wire is basically a three-dimensional line. So if they can't draw it two-dimensional, they're probably not going to be able to build it three-dimensionally. And if they do more than one sketch, the better they get at drawing it, the easier it's going to be to build it. So they do a lot of sketching during that first class time once we've watched the videos and kind of got an idea of what we're doing with it. And that's also when I have them kind of play around with different options. of what kind of circus performer they want to do. And if they're not sure, if they have a couple of different ideas, I suggest that they draw out those different ideas. And if they're really having a hard time drawing a specific one, then maybe that's not the one they want to go with. If it's something they're like, yep, I know exactly how I want to do this, they draw it really easily, then that's probably going to be a more successful project for them three-dimensionally. So this shows you her drawing of her acrobat and then her actual acrobat that she was able to make. And of course, there we go. Uh, this one is a tiger going through a hoop that's on fire. And this is kind of typical of what a lot of the projects wind up looking like. They do a lot of outlining. And once they get that, I try to encourage them to fill in their outline. Okay, you got this little nice little skeleton of it. Now, can you go in with more pipe cleaners and flesh out the body a little bit more? This one is supposed to be an elephant on top of an elephant on top of an elephant. But I was really impressed with her engineering skill and trying to get this to stand. And that's one of our things. This is a sculpture project. It has to be able to stand on its own. If they have to hold it to support it, then it doesn't count. It has to be able to stand on its own. And that the kids think is going to be really easy to do. And then once they start doing it, like, this is kind of hard. So they have to do some engineering and they have to figure out how they're going to support it, how they're going to balance it. A lot of them get them top heavy. So then they have to figure out what they need to do to the base to strengthen it. There's some problem solving involved. And a lot of the kids aren't used to having to do that. So it takes them a little while to get used to that. This is one that she created that's a seal with a ball balancing on the nose. This one is a group of acrobats that are bending around. It's kind of hard to see just how three-dimensional this one was, but it was a pretty cool piece. And this is another acrobat that's in one of those big rings that can roll around and so forth. And he did a good job of filling in the body. We talked about he had very much kind of a stick person originally, and he went back in and added a lot of color and detail to the clothes. And we talk about how circus performers usually don't have very plain clothes. They have really bright colors. And we talk about all the different crazy designs that their clothing can have on it because they're trying to draw attention to themselves. And this was another one where he really spent a lot of time on the details of the face, which can be kind of hard to do with pipe cleaners, but he did a pretty good job with it. This is one that was done earlier, previous year, where it's got the heavier duty wire inside it, and then he wrapped it with the pipe cleaners. This is supposed to be a fire baton twirler, and the baton itself did actually move. You could move the arm, and the baton would kind of twirl around a little bit. This one, I really wish I had thought at the time that she made this to make a video of this moving. The figure on it is not much to look at. She ran out of time, and so she just threw together this little guy, the person on there, within like the last 10 minutes of class. Uh, but it was the tricycle that she made that was amazing. It was actually a functioning tricycle. It was about this big, really small, but you could move the handlebars, you could pedal it. It actually was a little tiny functional tricycle. And some of the kids joked around about her trying to find a trained squirrel that would be just the right size to actually ride it. But it was an amazing feat of engineering that she made the entire thing completely out of wire. And just an awesome kid, and she blew me away. I don't think I could have built that. And she did it entirely on her own with absolutely no assistance. But it was an amazing tricycle. This is a simpler form. the outline of a strongman, but he did a really nice job in getting that form. And some of the pieces that Calder did were very much outlines like this. Is actually pretty similar to a strongman that Calder did. And he did have it so that the barbell could be moved back and forth. This one, acrobats have been very popular with my students. They really like to create acrobats, and um, it would swing back and forth. This one, it's kind of hard to see the figure, and again, I really wish I had taken video of this and not just a photograph. But the yarn piece on there was how you would move it. And it was a strong man that was holding a barbell, and you would move it with the yarn, and it would go up over his head and then back down, and you could move the piece back and forth. So it is not the most attractive piece, and you have to kind of squint a little bit to see that it's a person, but it was the engineering on it that works pretty cool. This was one that was actually a monkey that was a performer, and then the pipe cleaners down below were supposed to be the net for it. Those are just a few of the projects. I just picked a few photographs to show you. We've got quite a collection over the years. One of the things that I have done for my students to give some ideas to them is giving them picture packets. In the past, they have been actual picture packets. This year, because I didn't want to disinfect them constantly, I actually did it as a PowerPoint, actually a slide presentation that is in my Google Classroom. And so the kids can log into it and they can take a look at the pictures that are in it using their computers. These are some more photographs of student work that has been done in the past to give them some ideas of things that they can do. And then I found a bunch of pictures of different circus performers, and we just go through here as examples of giving them an idea of things that they can do. So I don't have a student going, I just can't think of anything to know, because there's a ton of pictures in here. They're not required to draw something from these pictures. It's just to give them kind of a jumping off point. And by me providing pictures for them, they're not wasting time surfing the internet, telling me that they're doing something when they're really goofing off. And I also don't have to worry about what might come up on the search engine accidentally because I provided the pictures for them. And a few others here. I give them the option of whether they want to create an animal or a circus performer, a person, or a combination. Sometimes they want to include several people, sometimes a person and an animal, combination of things, and that is up to them. And they are welcome to get ideas from these pictures and change them around, but it's kind of a good jumping off point. And again, we talk a lot about the um, costumes, the colors, all of that sort of thing to get them going on different ideas and things. Trying to think of what else you might be interested in knowing. Some of the other things that Calder has done kind of early on with some of his pieces. There is a school arts magazine that was done back in December 2013. There was a middle school lesson that was another one of those that kind of gave me some ideas on stuff. It was a middle school studio lesson done by, I'm not sure, Dunwoody, Khaki Dunwoody, I believe is the name, where she did wire sculpture pieces that were like that. It's really easy to find pieces that Calder did that are in that style of just a piece of wire. It looks basically like a continuous line drawing. Um, but there are some really cool pieces out there that are easy to find that Calder did, especially early on in his artistic career. that are very feasible for kids to do. Mobiles themselves can be really hard for them to balance. The materials that he used with his more famous works are much less forgiving. But the pieces that he did early on in his career, all kinds of scraps and just basic wires, really easy for the kids to manipulate and use. And all of my students have really loved the project. It's really kind of a universally loved and adored project. Sometimes I have students that kind of complain, oh, this is harder than I thought it would be. But they really turn out pretty successfully. You're going to have some that are more successful than others, but I very rarely have a student that just turns out with nothing. And the pipe cleaners, especially, are such a forgiving medium. They're so easy to manipulate, they're so easy to change that it's pretty easy for the students to kind of change their path if they're having a hard time with something, and they can use their just regular scissors that they have in their desk. I go into the classroom, I'm on a cart, so they're using their classroom scissors uh, with the projects, and it's really easy for them to manipulate and use. And so the pipe cleaners are very, very forgiving and easy for them to work with. But the kids have really loved the project, and it's been really successful. So I've done it for the last few years. And with all the COVID stuff that came around, initially I thought, well, I'm just not going to be able to do the project. But the more I thought about it and the more I thought about how much the kids really love doing the project, the more I decided I just wanted to see different ways that I could change it, because I didn't want to do away with it at all. Usually at the end of the year, I ask students, what were your favorite projects? What are ones maybe you didn't like as well, just to get some feedback from them. And the Calder project is always one that is pretty universally liked. The kids really love doing it. I've even had some students that have asked if we could do it a second time later on in the year. Can we do another one of those? Because they really love working with the wire and they like manipulating it. Let's see. I can't think of anything else to tell you. If you have any questions, any feedback that you want to give me, or have any specific questions about the project or how I do it or and so forth, my name is Shannon Wedel, Wedel, and you can always email me at shannon.wedel@usd428.net, and I would be glad to answer any questions you might have.